The war ended the way most interstellar wars did, not with victory songs, but with drifting wreckage and treaties signed far away from the dead. Across the ash-gray plains of Caris 9, the alien coalition withdrew in disciplined silence, leaving behind the wounded they could not carry and the ones they chose not to remember. Among those left behind lay Princess Sailira of the Aurelian Star Court. Her iridescent armor cracked, her wings burned, and folded uselessly against her back. She had been a symbol of unity and grace before the battle, and now she was just another broken body cooling beneath a sky choked with smoke. Scavenger drones passed overhead, scanning for weapons and salvage, but ignoring faint life signs because injured nobles were liabilities, not assets. Medical ships calculated survival probabilities and moved on because the princess required resources that could save 10 soldiers instead. Even her own people hesitated, bound by tradition that forbade retrieval once the court deemed a battlefield cursed. No one wanted the wounded alien princess because saving her meant political risk, shame, and the possibility of failure. Hours passed, and the sun dipped low, staining the clouds a bruised violet as silence settled heavy and final. That was when the human arrived. Not in a gleaming cruiser or with banners flying, but in a battered search and rescue skiff marked with faded Earth insignia. His name was Elias Rowan, a civilian contractor attached to the Human Relief Fleet, assigned to find survivors regardless of uniform or species. Elias had already been told to turn back twice. The coalition warned him the zone was unstable, and the Aurelians said the princess was already mourned. But humans had a habit of stepping into places where logic said do not go. Elias followed a weak biosignature through the smoke, guided by instinct and a stubborn belief that abandoned did not mean gone. He found her half buried in crystalline debris, her breathing shallow, and uneven light flickering along the fractures in her skin. Up close, she looked less like a princess and more like a fallen star dimming by the second. Elias knelt beside her, ignoring the warning pings from his suit, and carefully cleared the rubble away. His scanner screamed impossible odds. Multiple organ failures, unknown biology, and neural trauma that no human medic was trained to treat. The sensible choice was to log the body and leave. The expected choice was to walk away. Instead, Elias removed his helmet, letting the poisoned air sting his lungs, and spoke softly, even though he did not know if she could hear him. "You are not done yet." The words were simple, human, and entirely unreasonable. He activated an emergency stasis field, one meant for human soldiers, and watched in disbelief as it adapted itself to her alien physiology. Against every calculation, her vital signs stabilized just enough. Elias lifted her carefully, wings and all, and carried her back toward his skiff, knowing full well that by doing so he was disobeying orders, breaking treaties, and possibly rewriting the future. As the skiff lifted off the battlefield, the war officially ended for everyone else. For Elias and the wounded alien princess, it had only just begun. The human relief ship Mercy of Dawn was not equipped for royalty, alien or otherwise. Its halls smelled of antiseptic, recycled air, and old metal, and its med bay was designed for human anatomy and human mistakes. When Elias carried Sailira aboard, conversations stopped, and every eye turned toward the glowing, wounded figure in his arms. The ship doctor stared at the readings in disbelief, and then at Elias with open frustration. "She should not be alive," the doctor said carefully. Elias replied that alive was a flexible definition and asked what could be done. The answer was not encouraging. Aurelian biology was partially energy-based, partially crystalline, and deeply integrated with neural light patterns no human technology fully understood. The safest option was to transfer her to coalition space and hope her people would take responsibility. The most likely outcome was refusal. Elias stood by her stasis pod as arguments echoed around him. Command reminded him of jurisdiction. Diplomats warned of incidents. Logistics officers spoke of cost and risk. No one spoke of the princess herself. That silence settled something inside him. Humans had crossed oceans, deserts, and stars because leaving someone behind felt worse than danger. Elias made his decision quietly but firmly. He volunteered to stay with her, to oversee experimental treatment, to accept full responsibility if it failed. It was an unexpected choice, and one that forced the ship to pause and recalculate. Eventually, the captain agreed not out of confidence, but out of recognition of something deeply human and difficult to refuse. Treatment began slowly and carefully. Human nanomedicine adapted in real time, learning her physiology through trial, error, and patience. Elias spent days beside her translating sensor data into adjustments, holding her hand when her energy patterns spiked and speaking even when she did not respond. He told her about Earth oceans and thunderstorms, about how humans were fragile and stubborn, and kept choosing hope even when hope was inefficient. Somewhere in the quiet between words, Sailira listened. When she finally opened her eyes, they glowed faintly, not with royal brilliance, but with something softer, confused and afraid. She tried to move and failed, panic rippling through her light patterns. Elias spoke her name, the way the translator suggested, gently and slowly. "You are safe." No one has ever lied more kindly or more honestly at the same time. Her people sent a message 3 days later. They acknowledged her survival with formal distance and stated that due to political instability, her return was postponed indefinitely. In simpler terms, the galaxy still did not want her. Elias read the message twice, then deleted it before she could see. He chose not to tell her yet. He chose to stay. Recovery was not a straight line, it was a spiral looping back on itself, with progress and setbacks intertwined. Sailira's wings would never fully regenerate, but she learned to balance without them, adapting with quiet determination. Her connection to the Aurelian light chorus was damaged, leaving her isolated in ways Elias could only imagine. Yet in that isolation, something new grew. She learned human words and customs. She learned that humans ate for comfort and celebrated survival with laughter. Elias learned Aurelian silence, how meaning could exist without sound, and how light could express emotion more honestly than faces. They spent long hours talking through translators that struggled to keep up. Sailira spoke of court politics, expectations, and the unbearable weight of being born as a symbol rather than a person. Elias spoke of ordinary things, of family he barely spoke to, and a planet that argued constantly but rushed toward disasters together. Trust formed slowly, not as romance or destiny, but as shared vulnerability. She watched him work until exhaustion because he refused to give up on her. He watched her relearn herself piece by piece without bitterness. When the coalition finally sent an envoy, it was not with apologies, but with calculations. They offered extraction, conditional reinstatement, and a quiet return to a diminished role. Sailira listened with composed stillness and then looked to Elias. For the first time, the decision was hers. She chose to stay. The envoy was stunned and offended and warned of consequences. Sailira replied that abandonment had consequences too, and she had already lived through them. News spread slowly at first, then like wildfire through diplomatic channels. Aurelian princess declines return after human intervention. Commentators speculated, analysts argued, and the galaxy whispered. Humans mostly shrugged and said that sounded about right. Elias worried he had stolen her future. Sailira told him he had given her one. Neither of them were entirely correct, and both were close enough. Healing continued, not just of body, but of identity. Sailira stopped introducing herself as princess and started using her name. Elias stopped seeing himself as just a rescuer and started understanding the weight of what he had chosen. The first protest came from Aurelian hardliners. They accused humans of manipulation, cultural theft, and emotional coercion. The accusation would have held more weight if Sailira had not publicly addressed the council herself. Her message was calm, measured, and devastatingly honest. She spoke of abandonment, of being deemed expendable, and of a human who refused to accept that calculus. She did not ask for pity or restoration. She asked a single question. If a stranger could value her life so easily, why had her own people struggled? The broadcast echoed across systems, and something shifted. Other wounded soldiers, other forgotten civilians, other discarded allies saw themselves in her words. Human rescue fleets reported increased cooperation and unexpected alliances. Elias watched it unfold with awe and a growing sense of unease. He had not intended to start anything. Sailira reminded him that intention had never stopped consequences before. Threats followed offers, then treaties were written in softer language. The galaxy adjusted not because it wanted to, but because a precedent had been set. Someone had chosen compassion over advantage, and it had worked. Sailira was invited not back to court, but to councils, symposiums, and negotiations as a voice rather than a symbol. She accepted selectively, always on her terms. Elias remained at her side, not as a guard or savior, but as someone who had walked with her through the worst and stayed. They were asked often what their relationship was. They answered differently depending on who asked, and none of the answers were complete. The truth was simpler and harder to define. They had survived together. They had chosen each other when the galaxy had not. Years later, historians would argue about the moment everything changed. Some pointed to treaties, others to speeches or battles avoided. A few quieter voices pointed to a battlefield where one human ignored orders and lifted a wounded alien princess into his arms. Sailira never reclaimed her throne, and she never wanted to. She became something rarer, a bridge, a reminder that worth did not require permission. Elias returned to Earth, once bringing with him stories that shifted how people looked at the stars. They did not stay in one place. They traveled to reconstruction zones, to refugee habitats, to worlds still learning how to heal. Wherever they went, the story followed not as legend, but as proof. No one wanted the wounded alien princess until one human made an unexpected choice. That choice did not save the galaxy. It did something quieter and perhaps more important. It taught the galaxy that leaving someone behind was also a decision, and that humans were very bad at doing that. And sometimes that was exactly what the universe needed. Long after the war faded into archived data and memorial holograms, the consequences of one unexpected choice continued to unfold in ways no strategist could have predicted. Elias and Sailira had become symbols without ever seeking the role, and symbols had gravity that pulled events toward them, whether they wished it or not. On the frontier worlds, where empires rarely looked refugees, spoke their names with a kind of reverence that felt uncomfortable and deeply human. Not because they were rulers or conquerors, but because they represented proof that abandonment was not inevitable. That someone somewhere might still choose you. Sailira felt that weight most strongly when they arrived at Lumira Station, a fractured orbital habitat patched together from wreckage and hope. It was home to thousands displaced by conflicts no one wanted to claim responsibility for. Children of mixed species backgrounds played beneath flickering lights, their laughter echoing through corridors that smelled of recycled water and metal fatigue. They gathered when Celera walked among them, not kneeling or bowing, but reaching out curious and unafraid. Her light patterns shimmered, gently, not in royal display, but in warmth mirroring their excitement. Elias watched from a distance as she knelt to their level, speaking softly through a translator that now struggled less and listened more. Later that night, as the station drifted in quiet orbit, Celera confessed something she had not said aloud before. She told Elias that being unwanted had once defined her entire sense of self, that every decision she made at court had been shaped by fear of losing approval she never truly had. Now she said she felt something unfamiliar and unsettling. She felt free. Freedom, Elias realized, came with responsibility heavier than chains. People expected them to act, to intervene, to fix things that were broken simply because they existed nearby. Human fleets could not be everywhere, and neither could Celera's influence. So they chose something different. They began training programs pairing human rescue doctrine with Aurelian harmonic healing techniques. Medical teams learned to treat species once considered incompatible. Diplomats learned to listen before calculating. The galaxy resisted at first. Institutions always did. But results spoke louder than doctrine. Survival rates increased. Conflicts de-escalated faster when neutral rescue teams arrived before armies. And slowly, quietly, compassion became a strategic consideration. Not because it was kind, but because it worked. Elias sometimes wondered if this was what frightened the galaxy most. Not that humans cared, but that caring was contagious. The Aurelian star court eventually fractured under pressure from within. Younger generations questioned traditions that allowed a princess to be abandoned. Celera was invited again, not as a subject, but as an example. She declined the throne once more, but sent something else. A framework for reform built on shared responsibility rather than hierarchy. It was met with outraged dismissal and then reluctant discussion. Change never arrived all at once. It seeped in through cracks formed by stories like hers. Years passed, measured not in calendars, but in milestones. The first joint human-Aurelian rescue fleet launch. The first treaty clause prioritizing civilian extraction over territorial claims. The first war delayed because evacuation corridors were opened early. Elias aged in small visible ways, silver threading through his hair lines, settling around his eyes. Celera aged differently, her light deepening, gaining complexity rather than fading. They noticed these changes together, neither afraid nor sentimental. Their relationship never fit neat categories. It was not ownership or destiny or obligation. It was choice repeated daily, sometimes quietly, sometimes with effort. When Elias finally asked if she ever regretted staying, she answered without hesitation. She said regret belonged to a version of herself who believed worth had to be granted. She was no longer that person. The galaxy tested them again when a new conflict ignited near the rim. This time, the call for help came early, before the first mass casualty reports. That alone marked a shift historians would later underline. They arrived to find opposing fleets already standing down corridors of light, marking safe passage for civilians. Commanders cited precedent policy and fear of public backlash. But behind those reasons lay something simpler. They had seen what happened when someone chose otherwise. In the aftermath, a young alien officer approached Celera, hesitant but determined. He told her that years ago his sister had been left behind on a moon deemed strategically insignificant. He said her story had convinced him never to accept that logic again. Celera listened, placed a hand over his, and let her light soften. That moment would never appear in official records. But it mattered. Elias recorded fewer logs as time went on, trusting that not everything needed documentation to be real. Some things were meant to exist only in the lives they touched. Eventually, they returned to Karis 9, the battlefield where everything had begun. The land had started to heal crystalline growths, pushing through ash, reflecting sunlight in fractured rainbows. They stood where Elias had first knelt beside her. Celera closed her eyes, sensing faint echoes of what had been lost and what had been gained. She said the place no longer felt cursed. Elias smiled and said maybe it never was. Maybe it was just waiting for someone stubborn enough to care. As they left, a small marker was placed, not a monument, but a simple signal beacon broadcasting a message in multiple frequencies. If you are wounded, if you are alone, if you think no one wants you, help can be called from here. It was an unexpected ending to an unexpected choice. Not a triumph, not a tragedy, but a continuation. The galaxy would keep fighting, debating, calculating. But somewhere, always, someone would remember that once a wounded alien princess was left behind. And one human decided that was unacceptable. That memory became a quiet force shaping decisions long after both of them were gone. A reminder written not in stone, but in action. No one wanted the wounded alien princess. Until one human made an unexpected choice. And the universe never fully went back to the way it was.